where the company was restructured from being one big large company to 5 different business units with a small group head office. All roles were redefined. Everybody had to compete for jobs from the very top down. If you were to manage a business unit, you had to actually apply. Everybody had the choice to apply for all those jobs. New strategies in place, new staff in place, new systems, new skills. The whole was changed process, which was incredibly traumatic for the organisation because it was unprecedented. I mean, in that organisation, and what you could see, I suppose, on an individual basis was how much people's psychological contract with the organisation changed. It said my assumptions of my relationship with this organisation was that I'd be here for life, I'd get a good salary, I'd get my pension, and suddenly I have to apply for my job. So that's basically the background to it.
Okay, so, and as part of that then, we're picking it up then from the point of where the announcement has been made. You know, was there a redundancy thing put in place?
There were a lot of redundancies, yeah. A lot of redundancies. So in other words, you had to apply for jobs. If you didn't get a job, you had the choice of being put into a project team, which you can come to later, because there were a lot of project teams to actually design new change processes, or you could take voluntary redundancy. There wasn't compulsory redundancy.
Right. So when the redundancy program was run at that stage, then, and you I suppose you had the right size of people that were there, you were left with an organisation that basically had less people in it, but a whole new way of doing business.
Yeah, this is an organisation of thousands of people, so basically you're cascading the change and the restructuring, so it takes a period of time to happen.
Yes.
You put your management teams in place first, then you put the next layer, and then you put the next layer, and then you, obviously, the closer you get to the ground, the bigger the numbers you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And you know what the question you had earlier on about managing business as usual while managing this was probably the most traumatic and difficult thing you could actually.
So how did you manage it? How did you manage to tackle that?
Well, you manage it. You actually, to be honest,
during that time, what did you do?
You manage it with a lot of difficulty. You work 12, 14-hour days. You work probably 6 days a week. You sometimes maybe do 80% of your job.
Yes.
Because 20% of it you never get done. If you look at it in terms of the change project, I think what was done was the design of the change was completely separated from the day-to-day business. So it was either in the form of project teams or in a separate transformation unit, and that seemed to be necessary, because if you just left the design of the change up to people who were running the business on a day-to-day basis, it would never happen, and the company would never actually equip itself to move forward and compete with young dynamic companies.
My understanding of that as well, that you got a lot of consultants in. I think, Frank, you were involved in that at one stage, and we did a bit of involvement as well, but the place was crawling with consultants. Did you have too many consultants in?
Well, you see, it depends on who you talk to. Apart
from us now.
A lot of the people would, there was a phrase at the time called the monopoly mindset.
Yeah.
The people who were saying, what's happening around here, I don't like it. This used to be a great company, and look at what's happening to us. And the place is crawling with smart suited consultants, smart alecky people, who can tell us now how to run our business.
Yeah.
But I think the people at the top took the view that there needed to be an absolute wholehearted drive to actually bodies as they could. The level embedded resistance that was there to it. So I was in meetings where some of the senior managers were saying, we just have to drive on this, and in certain instances it may come across as being a little bit brutal, but we have to do it, because we're not going to get the full engagement, we're not going to get the full readiness, but the facts coming from the environment and our own performance are clear. If we don't do it, we're in bigger trouble.
Yeah, I remember being part of that, Mick, and I remember being at meetings and sessions, and there were people, actually, I got the feeling certainly there were people around the table that thought at one stage early on in this that this was just kind of a flavour of the month. It's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it was grand. I remember being indulged, this is grand, sure, more or less they'll be here today, gone in a couple of months' time, and that's it, we'll get back to normal. I don't know whether that was widespread or not. Certainly I came across part of that.
It's an interesting point, and in one of our previous sessions, John Guinan spoke about measuring a company's ability to change based on their previous experience. So
in that case,
in a monopoly situation, the company would have gone through various half-hearted attempts at change.
Yeah.
But the narrative wouldn't have been as strong. So they were coming from those previous, should we try that before mentality, and it didn't work, and it went away, and they came up with something. So a lot of that thinking was based on past experience, but the difference here was, and I think it just shows the power of it, you have a new management team in place. They come from a completely different mindset, because their frame of reference is not this company, it's a commercial world.
But Frank arrives on the scene at one stage. Generally when Frank arrives on the scene,
we got worried then.
Something's going to happen. And I think that's when people started to get real, Frank, was it, in a way?
Well, it's a very important point that if there's no imperative, or there's no sense of crisis, or there's no if there's no identification or buy-in of a need to change, exactly what Mick described, you're going to get exactly what Mick describes. Actually, they tried this before, and so we sat them out.
Yeah.
They went away, and we all went back to doing what we do around here, and we'll all get on with it again this time. So it just occurs to me, how do you communicate, the key difference that there's an imperative in the market going to be.
That time we want people actually to engage with what the change is going to look like in the end.
Yeah.
But if we look at how the thing started to lift off, to get that change of mindset, Mick, the change of mindset, which is, I suppose it's a good one for the case study because it's from a monopoly situation to a really competitive situation, which is probably more exaggerated than most companies would have because they're commercial in the first place. But getting that across, just talk to us through again, you saw that happening, the beginnings of it happening. How did that actually happen? What process was in place? What are the actual practical things that were done to begin to get the main body of people to start thinking in terms of, hey, this commercial, this competitive, as opposed to just let's do the job.
So what you're trying to do is to get everything, all your ducks in a row. You get your new structure in place. You get new staff on new contracts of employment. You develop new skills or you recruit new skills. You have to look at your reward systems. People were put on new contracts, new salaries with a bonus based on certain targets.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the 7S model that McKinsey's have. But basically, what we're trying to do to actually is to need to focus on the past.
Okay, for those of us who are not too well up on McKinsey and the 7S, so maybe just go through that for us, right?
I might miss out on some of
that. Wasn't expecting that one.
It's saying you have a strategy, you have a structure, you have your staff, you have the right staff in place, you have the right skills, you have the right systems. So you're trying to align them all. So basically, we're saying
5, I think, is it? That's 5. There's 2 somewhere.
We'll come back with the other 2.
Okay, come back with the other 2 cross more, isn't it?
You'd have to have the bull.
Go on.
Well, I think
McKinsey's 5 plus 2, right?
5 plus 2, yeah.
You got the cut first.
So
but you were saying actually,
the point I'm making is that if you're going to become a commercial company, there's a number of dimensions involved. So there's no point saying to people, you're now in a commercial environment. We're demanding real performance from you with new metrics if you don't incentivize them. So basically, the attempt was to actually create the full package that would actually deliver the results over time.
Yeah. So you're looking at behaviours, and that's one of the things, Frank, that we're going to change a culture. I mean, a culture is often written down like, stuck up on the wall and says this is our culture. But culture is really behaviours.
That's the mission statement.
And the values. Yeah. But anyway, the culture is how things are actually done around here. As we said last week, and in fact, it wasn't from me. This came from a person who actually not too far away from the sort of organisation we're talking about. So the culture is what we do around here when nobody's looking. So, but in doing that, in getting that to happen, Frank, just again talk us through your experience, and again even with this project, how that happened in terms of getting people to start looking at life in a different way and behaving in a different way.
Well, as Mick says, you have to start changing the structures, and you have to start redefining the realities, and you start in the overall organisational sense, and it comes cascading down.
What do you mean by that? Come on, I mean, in terms of, are we talking about what people would actually do in their jobs specifically? Here's what we expect.
It ends up in what people actually do in their jobs, and they're going to have to do it differently.
And who decides that? Is that your team, Mick, or who decides what that behaviour is going to be?
It might be just interesting to see what actually happened at the time, because the 5 new management teams all went through a fairly intensive team development exercise that was facilitated by an external consultant.
Right.
I sat in one of them. It was change in terms of changing culture itself, because a lot of 360 feedback process and direct feedback process. So I'm sitting across the table, you're the consultant, and you're saying to me, no, I want you to give Frank 3 areas of feedback that he does well and 3 areas of feedback where I think he needs to improve on. And there was a lot of actually stuff that was very, in terms of the previous culture, was very powerful in actually moving forward, and the messages it gave to people. The general managers of the business units and a lot of the directors would have got individual coaching from external coaches, and that would have been deliberately funded by the company as well, because this huge effort was to commercialise the operations of the organisation and to move the frame of reference to a more commercial